Anytime, anywhere. ABC News Now. Start here.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hello and welcome to Time Tunnel, where we find out what was making news on this day in the past. I'm Ned Potter in New York. Today we travel back to this day in 1972. Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner had the headlines.
Good evening from ABC News headquarters in Washington. I'm Howard K. Smith.
I'm Harry Reasoner in New York. These are tonight's headlines. Representative Paul McCloskey withdraws his bid for the Republican presidential nomination. The Republican national chairman charges that AT&T may have violated the Corrupt Practices Act by delaying collection of a bill owed by the Democrats. Wholesale prices rise 0.9%, the sharpest monthly increase in a year. And the United States and China agree to establish diplomatic contacts in Paris to carry out trade, travel, and cultural exchanges. Congressman Paul McCloskey announced today that he is dropping his liberal challenge to President Nixon in the Republican presidential primaries. McCloskey, who received 20% of the vote in New Hampshire's Republican primary, said lack of funds was among the reasons for his decision. He made his announcement in Menlo Park, California.
The harsh reality of the situation is that you cannot run a credible presidential campaign without large sums of money. I obviously don't have that money. I'm substantially in debt. And beyond that, there are about 10 states where my name is on the ballot. I will leave it on the ballot. I really can't take it off in those states. And I hope it will stand as a symbolic protest, and I hope it will attract some votes against this bombing policy and the untruthfulness of this administration in Vietnam.
Congressman, will you support any Democratic candidates?
I don't know. I will not support President Nixon so long as he continues the bombing policy. I think that the policy of the continued killing in Southeast Asia transcends any concept of party loyalty or partisan politics.
Here in Washington, the major political story is still the Senate hearings on the ITT Justice Department affair. Today, columnist Jack Anderson testified that former Attorney General Mitchell knew of ITT's money offer to the Republican convention, even though Mitchell denies it. The Senate investigators will hear next week from Mitchell and possibly from Mrs. Dita Beard, the ITT lobbyist who, Anderson says, gave him the information on the case. Today, there was some preliminary word on what Mrs. Beard may say. Tony Pepper reports from KBTV in Denver.
Mrs. Dita Beard is still suffering from chest pains here at the Rocky Mountain Osteopathic Hospital in Denver, but she met today with her attorney, David Fleming, and he later met with newsmen at the hospital.
Mrs. Beard has asked me to announce, and I, as her attorney, have concurred in this action, to announce that she is extremely anxious to give testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in order to put at rest false rumors, innuendos, and outright lies with regard to the current controversy involving ITT and the administration. Mrs. Beard categorically denies the allegation that there was ever an arrangement between ITT and the administration involving favorable treatment of the antitrust actions in exchange for a pledge to help underwrite the expenses of the Republican convention in San Diego by the Sheraton Hotel chain, a subsidiary of ITT. She further emphatically denies that former Attorney General John Mitchell ever told her that President Nixon commented about, took part in, or requested a settlement of the ITT Justice Department suits.
Mrs. Beard's doctor says it will be at least early next week before her condition will permit even written questions. Tony Pepper, ABC News, Denver.
Meanwhile, Republicans today charge the Democrats with political misdeeds involving AT&T. Republican Party Chairman Robert Dole made this argument. Since the Democrats owe AT&T $1.5 million from the last presidential election, AT&T's supply of phone service for the next Democratic convention constitutes an advance or a contribution, and that may be illegal. AT&T responded today that its service is going to be on a cash basis, strictly a business transaction. Another political note, a black politics convention is assembling in Gary, Indiana. ABC's Lem Tucker reports.
Arriving here from across the country represent thinking ranging from the conservative NAACP to the militant Black Panthers. They hope to bridge that gap in order to gain more political clout. And they're here to plot the future for black Americans. Unity is their key word.
First is the unification of black people, diverse groups of black people, the creation of a unified political culture, and secondly, to try to transform our potential through structure into power.
We're concerned about the black agenda or the black proposition. We're not here to negate anybody or any effort. We're here to affirm the transcendent issue.
So what begins here tomorrow is the first real national political convention of 1972. But it is more than just that. An 89-year-old black man said to me, "I've been around, I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot, but this is the beginning." Lem Tucker, ABC News.
In other news, the Food and Drug Administration has ordered sharp reduction in the lead content of paint effective beginning in 1974. The hope is to protect children from lead poisoning, which can cause brain damage and even death. Lead serves primarily in paint as a drying agent. The government's action will reduce its content to trace amounts. The government today banned the interstate shipment of all pesticides registered for control of predatory animals. Ranchers and farmers often use poisons to kill animals which attack cattle and sheep. The government noted that the poisons often kill other wildlife as well. ABC's George Watson, reporting from Belfast, learned today that Britain has been having secret, indirect contacts with the outlawed Irish Republican Army on the violence in Northern Ireland. Watson said that, as a result, Britain is expected to take steps shortly to deal with the crisis. Watson informants said that there are strong possibilities that the British may suspend or dissolve the Protestant-run Parliament in Northern Ireland and impose some form of London rule that would open the way for Catholic participation in Northern Ireland's affairs. Indications of developments in the crisis came today when the wing of the Irish Republican Army that deals in terrorism announced a 72-hour truce beginning at midnight. A spokesman said the step was taken to enable Britain to make a positive response toward a political settlement in Northern Ireland. President Nixon's trip to China produced an agreement by the United States and China to have trade, travel, and cultural exchanges. Today, the White House announced that American and Chinese diplomats will use Paris as a contact point for working out the details of such agreements. The lessening of Chinese suspicion and hostility toward other nations portends a freer life inside China for foreign visitors and for diplomats stationed there. Here's a report on the diplomatic compounds in which foreign diplomats have been living and on what's ahead from ABC's Ted Koppel.
Foreigners here in Peking have endured varying degrees of hostility over the years, but even now when the diplomatic climate is quite balmy, foreign diplomats and their families are still required to live in splendid isolation in separate compounds like this one.
The Waijiao Da Lo compound was built in 1958. Those diplomats who'd been in China for a long time, but whose governments were not politically close to Peking, found themselves living here. During the Cultural Revolution in 1967 and 68, these courtyards were never silent. The Red Guard, with bullhorns and loudspeakers, kept up a deafening and constant barrage of Communist Party songs and slogans. Some diplomats and their families were badly beaten up. That was during the lowest ebb of China's recent foreign policy, when diplomacy in this country was almost a dirty word. Now the pendulum has swung in the other direction. The courtyard of this compound is deafeningly silent nowadays. Anti-imperialist or anti-revisionist slogans that once covered every wall have now been painted over again. Nearby, in fact, just down the road, the Chinese are building new diplomatic compounds. So many governments are tripping over themselves to recognize the People's Republic of China these days that Peking is facing something of a housing crunch. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, Peking.
Howard will have tonight's comment in a moment.
It is not yet proven that ITT bought itself a deal by means of a big contribution to the Republican Party, But it is clear that whatever happened in that one case, big corporations are always buying influence by huge contributions to both political parties. That has always been bad, but now it is dangerous. The big have suddenly grown much bigger and better able to buy influence. The late 1960s saw the biggest wave of mergers of big into huge in history. Over 3,000 mergers a year, unheard of concentrations of wealth. The result is typified by this. One soap conglomerate has a mere advertising budget that is 20 times bigger than the funds allowed the antitrust division to control bigness. Think of the power that giants like that have over politicians strapped for campaign funds. The usual justification for bigness is it is efficient. Well, the truth is, beyond a certain point, bigness produces laziness, not efficiency. And we've passed that point. Before the wave of mergers, we had no trade deficit with the world. Since it, we have the biggest deficit in our history. We're not competing. Before the mergers, our machine tool industry led the world. Since then, our machine tool industry has fallen to third place behind Germany and Russia and is still falling. Early in this century, Teddy Roosevelt got worried about big business and called J.P. Morgan's big new trust into court. Morgan sent him a message saying, "Send your man to see my man and they can settle it." TR sent back a message, "I don't want to settle it, I want to stop it." Well, it's gotten much worse now, and we'd better stop it, or democracy will lose meaning. Harry?
Thank you, Howard. That's tonight's news and a comment. I'm Harry Reasoner. Good night.
This has been the ABC Evening News with Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner, Monday through Friday in color. The guest on ABC's Issues and Answers program next Sunday will be Alabama's Governor George Wallace. Wallace will be interviewed by correspondents Steve Bell and Edward P. Morgan. This has been a presentation of ABC News.
And what you can do for your country.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.